Naomi has dreamed of becoming a pastry chef since childhood. At 7, she tried to bake a cake with her mother for the first time. She helped her mother put cream between the layers of the cake. At that moment, the little girl realized what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. Her mother earned money by baking pastries and even wanted to open her own shop. But one obstacle prevented her from achieving this dream. Naomi's father drank a lot. Initially, he only drank on weekends, but later Peter started drinking every day and eventually lost his job. Naomi's mother had to support the entire family. She worked as an office worker in a school until the evening, and when she came home, she baked cakes, no matter how tired she was. However, the money she earned was not enough to meet all the family's needs. When Naomi turned 18, she decided to pursue a career in pastry, but her mother insisted she go to school and get a normal job because it was impossible to make enough money by baking cakes. Naomi didn't want to upset her mother, so she enrolled in a college to become an accountant, as they couldn't afford university. Unfortunately, it wasn't Naomi who chose this profession but her mother, believing that with an accounting degree, one could always find a job and earn enough money. A year later, Naomi's father died from alcoholism. Naomi's and her mother's lives became even harder, as they had to use all their savings to pay for the funeral. Sometimes, they even felt slightly relieved by his death, as no one complicated their already difficult lives anymore. Naomi hated college and her profession. She constantly wanted to drop out of her studies, but she couldn't, knowing how important it was to her mother. In her 3rd year of college, Naomi's life was about to change completely without her knowing. A student from another town, David, transferred to their college. Unlike Naomi, he loved his future profession and even planned to go to university. Many girls in college were interested in him, but he chose Naomi. David invited Naomi for coffee, and she told him she didn't want to work as an accountant but dreamed of becoming a pastry chef. "Be patient. We're already in the 3rd year," David told her. "Your mother will be happy if you get your economics degree. After that, you can work wherever you want. But if you marry me, you won't have to work at all. You can bake cakes as much as you want. It's our first date, and you're already talking about marriage." Naomi laughed. "When I first saw you, I knew right away you would marry me," he replied confidently. David wasn't lying. Naomi and David got married a month after graduating from college. As planned, David went to university. Meanwhile, Naomi had to work as an accountant for a while because the young couple needed money. David was one of the best students at the university. In his 2nd year, he started working part-time for a large company. Naomi was happy with David. They weren't rich and couldn't afford to buy a car or an apartment, but they had enough money to meet their basic needs. A year after their marriage, Naomi's mother passed away. It turned out she had heart problems for a long time but never found the time or money for a medical examination. Naomi suffered greatly. She took 2 weeks off to recover from her mother's death and spent that time in her mother's apartment, remembering how happy she was there as a child. But now, the apartment was empty. There were no more carpets on the floor where she and her father assembled a miniature railway, nor the sofa where her drunk father always slept. Natalie had gotten rid of them right after her husband's death. However, there was still a whisk with which Naomi had whipped cream for the first time in her life, and a rotating stand on which Natalie decorated her sweet masterpieces. Naomi didn't want to leave this apartment, and there was no reason to. Why rent an apartment when they now had a place to live? David supported his wife in this idea. They renovated the apartment, changed the wallpaper, and replaced some furniture. Only memories of the past atmosphere remained, captured in photos. Gradually, Naomi recovered from her mother's death, but it was still hard for her to work as an accountant. David often repeated to his beloved wife that he would keep his promise and that she wouldn't have to work. She just had to wait a little until he got a promotion at work and finished university. After some time, the couple started thinking about having a baby, but they decided to postpone this decision until better days. 3 years passed. David kept his promise. He managed to achieve everything he dreamed of. He got a promotion at work, and Naomi finally quit her hated job and started baking pastries. One day, David came home from work with a strange expression on his face. He behaved oddly and asked strange questions. "David, what interesting adventures could I have at work?" Naomi laughed. "I spent the whole day at home. A customer didn't come to pick up the cake today, so you can eat it with tea." David eagerly ate a piece of cake, then started praising his wife. That's when Naomi understood the reason for his strange behavior. What are you planning? Is there something you want to ask me? Naomi asked. I'm thinking about buying a car, David quickly replied, lowering his eyes. It seemed he was waiting for his wife's permission to make this purchase. Naomi didn't mind. A car would really make their life more comfortable. They wouldn't need to rush to catch the bus anymore. Besides, they were planning to have a baby, so a car was a necessity. They already had some savings, so Naomi suggested looking for cheap used cars together. But David unexpectedly said, I already know what kind of car we need, but the problem is we need to take out a loan. Our savings won't be enough for this purchase, Naomi immediately protested. Why buy such an expensive car? Our savings would be enough for a good used car. You don't understand, David replied, looking away. I hold an important position at work. In fact, I'm almost the most important person in the company. Even junior managers drive luxury cars. I can't buy an old used car. That's a very strange explanation. Does anyone really care what car you drive? And why do you care about others' opinions? You don't understand how important it is, her husband replied seriously. I constantly attend very important meetings, and if I arrive in an old car, I'll make a bad impression on my partners. Besides, it's better to buy a new car. An old used car will require a lot of investment. The last argument about investments in a used car worked better than reasoning about her husband's supposed reputation. Naomi approved the purchase of an expensive but reliable and safe car, but it turned out that buying an expensive car wasn't what David was afraid to ask Naomi. As I said, we need to take out a loan to buy this car, but I can only get a loan if it's secured by your apartment, simply because I have nothing else. Naomi put down the plate she was washing and looked seriously at her husband. She was afraid to take such a risk. What if something goes wrong, she said. What if you lose your job? Then the bank will seize our apartment to pay off the debts. Where will we live then, Naomi? David said softly, approaching his wife. He took her hand and continued, That won't happen. This loan won't affect you in any way. Even if I lose this job, I'll find another. You know I'll do everything to make you happy and comfortable. Naomi resisted a bit more, expressing her concerns, but eventually David managed to convince her. The man had never lied to her and had always kept his promises. The last argument about investments in a used car worked better than reasoning about her husband's supposed reputation. Naomi approved the purchase of an expensive but reliable and safe car, but it turned out that buying an expensive car wasn't what David was afraid to ask Naomi. As I said, we need to take out a loan to buy this car, but I can only get a loan if it's secured by your apartment, simply because I have nothing else. Naomi put down the plate she was washing and looked seriously at her husband. She was afraid to take such a risk. What if something goes wrong, she said. What if you lose your job? Then the bank will seize our apartment to pay off the debts. Where will we live then, Naomi? David said softly, approaching his wife. He took her hand and continued, That won't happen. This loan won't affect you in any way. Even if I lose this job, I'll find another. You know I'll do everything to make you happy and comfortable. Naomi resisted a bit more, expressing her concerns, but eventually David managed to convince her. The man had never lied to her and had always kept his promises. A month later, they bought a new car. David immediately took Naomi for a ride. They drove on the highway, admired the nature, and enjoyed their happiness. Suddenly, Naomi urgently asked to stop. She felt nauseous. There are probably too many turns on the road. I'll try to drive more carefully so you don't feel sick anymore, David said when Naomi got back in the car. I don't think that's why I feel sick, she replied, drinking some water. I've been feeling sick for 2 weeks now. Maybe another one of our dreams is about to come true. David got excited and wanted to clarify. You mean you're pregnant? I'm afraid that's possible, Naomi replied. I'll see a doctor tomorrow, Naomi, my love. I can't believe it. I'm so happy, David exclaimed. But what are you afraid of? We've been dreaming of having children for so long. I just don't think it's the right time, Naomi replied. How will we manage the loan and a baby? A baby will cost a lot of money, Naomi. Have I ever told you that I'll do everything to ensure you live a prosperous life? David winked at his wife with a smile. Have I ever broken my promise? Naomi calmed down a bit, because she trusted her husband. David always kept his promises. But she had no idea how he managed to do so. David continued to support his family, but Naomi couldn't make and sell cakes anymore due to morning sickness. The couple was expecting the birth of their daughter. David spent more and more time at the office to provide for his wife and their future daughter. He had to handle more clients, close deals faster, and write many reports. He only wanted the best for his family, but he didn't realize how his work could affect his loved ones. If he had known the consequences, he would have hated himself at the moment he decided to take out his first loan to buy a car. Yes, after getting the first loan and buying the car, David took out several other loans from other banks, but Naomi found out about it too late. One day, the doorbell rang at their house. Naomi opened the door to find two men in black suits. "Are you David's wife?" one of them asked. "Yes, but who are you?" Naomi replied. "We're from the bank," the man said. "Your husband has some debts he hasn't paid, and we're here to discuss this issue with you." "No, there must be a mistake. My husband is very responsible and always pays his bills on time." "Not this time, Mrs. Carter," the second man replied. "Your husband owes a lot of money, and you're responsible for paying his debts." Naomi froze. The baby started kicking in her belly. "No, it's impossible," she said, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Can I pay part of the debt now, and the rest later?" The men exchanged glances. "We can give you some time to pay the debt, but you need to sign a document confirming your commitment," the first man said. "And if you don't pay the debt by the due date, the bank will seize your apartment." Naomi nodded, tears streaming down her face. The next day, she had a long conversation with David. He was genuinely sorry for not telling Naomi about the other loans. He didn't want to worry her, especially after she got pregnant. The situation was complicated. David promised to pay off all the debts soon, but he needed more time. Naomi's pregnancy progressed normally, and she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Sophia. Naomi was very happy, but the joy was overshadowed by financial problems. David worked hard, but his earnings weren't enough to pay off the debts. They had to sell their car and other valuables to reduce the debt. Naomi started baking cakes again to earn extra money, but it was still not enough. One day, David came home with bad news: he lost his job. The company went bankrupt, and all employees were laid off. Naomi was devastated. She didn't know how they would survive without David's salary. The bank kept sending letters and calling, demanding immediate payment of the debt. Naomi was afraid they would lose their apartment. She couldn't sleep at night, worrying about their future. One evening, David told Naomi he found a way to solve their problems. He had a friend who was willing to lend him money to pay off the debt. "But there's a condition," David said. "I'll have to work for him for a while to repay the loan." Naomi agreed, hoping this would be the solution to their problems. David left the next day. He promised to call and write, but days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Naomi received no news from him. She was left alone with Sophia, struggling to make ends meet. She missed David terribly, but had to stay strong for their daughter. One day, Naomi received a letter. It was from David. He wrote that he was sorry for not contacting her earlier. He was working in a distant town, trying to earn enough money to repay the loan. He promised to come back soon. Naomi was relieved but still worried about their future. She continued to bake cakes and take care of Sophia. Despite the difficulties, she never gave up hope. She would never hold David in her arms again, never talk to him again. She realized this, but she tried not to think about it until she entered that frightening room. She was scared to enter because once she did, her life would be divided into before and after. "We're going for a body identification," the doctor finally replied, lowering his eyes. He was tired. The woman's heart froze. "A body identification," she repeated slowly. "But that doesn't mean it's my husband, does it?" "Just go to the morgue and see the body for yourself," the doctor said. He was exhausted and irritated, but he realized he shouldn't show it to the woman who was about to go through a difficult ordeal. Everyone at the hospital was sure of the deceased's identity because they had found his ID card, but it was still necessary to identify the body anyway. The doctor opened the door and let her into the room. The woman immediately sensed a terrible smell. When she saw the body on the table, she felt sick. "Ready?" asked the doctor. Naomi nodded, clutching her handkerchief tightly. The doctor pulled the sheet back from David's face. Tears immediately streamed from the woman's eyes. She screamed loudly and nearly fainted, but the doctor managed to catch her and led her outside for some air. The investigators were already waiting. The doctor gave Naomi a sedative so she could speak calmly to the police, but she couldn't pull herself together for a long time. The woman curled up, bent over, only moaning softly instead of speaking. When the medication finally took effect, they told her what had happened. David hadn't noticed the warning sign and had driven onto the train tracks. The barrier had closed right in front of him, and there were cars behind him. He had nowhere to go. Of course, upon seeing the car, the train tried to slow down, but it was too late. David died within seconds. His last thoughts were that he had left his family in a terrible situation. The man only managed to say softly while looking at the train, "I'm sorry." From that day on, Naomi no longer lived but existed like a robot. She automatically repeated the usual daily routine. In the morning, she had to wash her face, feed her daughter, go for a walk with her, come home, feed her again, and put her to bed. The woman herself hardly ate. After the funeral, her condition didn't improve much. Nothing could bring her back to normal, but she didn't yet know that this wasn't the only ordeal she had to endure. A month after David's death, Naomi started baking cakes again and saving a little money. One day, while she was baking a cake in the kitchen as usual, she suddenly smelled a sharp odor of smoke. Naomi ran into the hallway and saw that her front door was on fire. She rushed to get a bucket of water and put out the fire. She felt that someone had deliberately set her door on fire. Naomi stepped out of the apartment and saw words written in red paint on the wall, "Return the money." This was how the woman discovered how David had ensured a happy and prosperous life for her and her daughter. It turned out that the man owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to debt collectors. David had taken out many loans from different banks and then simply stopped paying them back because he had no more money. Naomi found out that the company where her husband worked was bankrupt. For the last few months, David had earned almost nothing. But that wasn't the biggest problem either. About a week after the door was set on fire, bailiffs came to Naomi's apartment. They were going to sell it. David had taken his first loan by mortgaging Naomi's apartment and had stopped repaying that loan a long time ago. Naomi pleaded for some time. She promised to find the money, but the bailiffs told her that it was already impossible to change anything. "It's my only place to live," Naomi cried. "Do you want to make my child and me homeless?" "Ma'am, there is nothing we can do to help you," the bailiffs replied. "While we handle the paperwork, try to repay some of the loan." The man handed Naomi a paper with the amount written on it. The woman realized she needed to find a new place to live because she could never gather such a large amount quickly. David had stopped repaying the loan a long time ago, and the amount had increased significantly. Furthermore, David had problems with debt collectors. Naomi couldn't even sell her husband's car. It was just a heap of scrap metal after the accident. Naomi desperately tried to find money or a place to live, but she failed. Eventually, Naomi and Alice became homeless. They had no relatives and no one wanted to help them. "Anna, can I stay in your apartment for a little while?" Naomi asked her neighbor. "I'm sorry, but I'm renting this apartment. If the landlord finds out, I'll have to look for a new place too," Anna replied. Naomi got down on her knees and begged her to let her stay the night, but Anna refused. "It's warm outside now. Besides, I believe there are many structures that help the homeless," Anna replied calmly. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing more I can do to help you." The young woman slammed the door. Naomi leaned against the wall and cried bitterly. "Mama, I'm hungry," Alice said softly. "My little girl, I'm hungry too, but we have to be patient a little longer," Naomi replied. They left the building and Naomi looked around. Where were they supposed to go now? The woman didn't have much money left. She realized it would only last for a few days. Naomi took her daughter's hand and stepped forward. Suddenly, a black bag fell in front of them. The woman quickly looked up and saw her neighbor closing the window and hiding behind the curtain. Naomi looked at the bag and noticed there was a note attached to it. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing more I can do to help you." Naomi picked up the bag, opened it, and saw it contained a box of biscuits, a few chocolate bars, a carton of milk, and some bread. "Thank you," Naomi shouted. She took out the biscuits, gave them to her daughter, and they continued on their way. The woman didn't know where they were going. Naomi didn't plan to spend the night on the street. She had heard about people sleeping in train stations, so she decided to go there. That night, Naomi and Alice slept in the train station's waiting room. They had food, so they could save a little money. Alice still didn't understand what was happening and why they had to spend the night in such a crowded place. "Mama, are we going somewhere?" the naive little girl asked in the morning. "No, baby," Naomi replied. "We're just going to stay here for a while," but they couldn't spend another night there. In the evening, a station employee approached Naomi and wanted to know which train they were waiting for. "Honestly, we're not waiting for any train," Naomi replied softly, taking the man aside so her daughter wouldn't hear the conversation. "We just need somewhere to spend the night until I find a solution to my situation." "Ma'am, this is not a hotel," the man replied sternly. "If you need a place to sleep, you can get a hotel room. I have to ask you to leave the waiting room, or I'll have to call the police." Naomi pleaded with him not to do that. She said she and her daughter would leave the station immediately. It was so painful for her to realize that they were being expelled even from this place. She still couldn't believe that her life was falling apart. She had always dreamed of providing Alice with the best possible childhood, filled with happiness and toys, and now they found themselves wandering homeless, desperately searching for a place to sleep. Naomi knew she had to stay strong for her daughter, but each day was becoming more and more difficult. They wandered the streets, looking for a shelter to spend the night, but all the shelters were full. Finally, they found an old, unused telephone booth. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was better than nothing. "Mama, I'm scared," Alice said, clinging to Naomi. "Don't worry, my darling. I'm here. Nothing will happen to you," Naomi replied. Even though she herself was terrified, she held Alice in her arms and broken chairs and tables were put away, and the utensils were organized. "Everything looks great," said the woman, admiring the result of her work. The woman found a stack of papers in the office, wrote an advertisement for the bakery, and placed them all over town. The next day, she received her first order. After tasting the cake, the customer immediately declared that he would recommend it to all his friends. "The interior doesn't look as fancy as it could," said the girl, looking around, "but I've never eaten such a delicious cake. You know, there are no good bakeries in our town," she added. That's how Naomi started her own business and gradually attracted more and more customers. She saved some money for herself and her daughter, and the rest was invested in the work and renovation of the restaurant. Alice gladly helped her mother, distributing advertisements for the bakery and even helping with cooking and cleaning. 6 months passed, and the small restaurant became increasingly popular. Naomi felt she was becoming not only a pastry chef but also a true businesswoman. Of course, her accounting education was useful, but even in this small town, there was competition. The owners of other restaurants noticed that the old restaurant was starting to attract customers again. Naomi's business was gradually growing. She hired excellent staff, allowing her to expand her assortment. Various inspections began to visit the restaurant, but the woman was not afraid to face them. She didn't want to lose what she had created. This restaurant was the only chance she and her daughter had for a normal future. The fire department and health service inspectors were satisfied with the inspection results. Naomi treated them with her special cake and promised to make them 3 free orders. All the inspectors were satisfied, but when officials came to check the food license, there were problems. But Benjamin helped with that. He was surprised to learn that Naomi had managed to renovate the restaurant. The man paid the required amount, and no one had any more questions for Naomi after that situation. Benjamin forgot about this town and this restaurant. The man did not believe that a homeless woman could succeed in the restaurant business, and he paid for the license only to avoid problems, as he was still the owner of the restaurant. Naomi relaxed and continued to work and develop her business. 3 years had passed since Benjamin had given the restaurant to Naomi. The businessman had long forgotten about the situation with the food license, and he was sure that the woman and her daughter were simply living in his building. But one day, Benjamin's assistant advised him to sell the restaurant. "We cooperate with large foreign companies, but at the same time, you own an obscure restaurant. What's she doing there? Selling pies? Is that the kind of reputation you want, Henry?" "I can't do that to her after all. She saved my son's life," Benjamin replied stubbornly. "I think you've already thanked this woman enough by letting her live here for a few years," Henry continued. "At least go there and check your property. Maybe she's already gone." The man left for the small town. At the entrance to the town, he noticed a poster indicating there was a Michelin-starred restaurant in this town. There was also a photo of the restaurant's interior. Wow! Benjamin marveled. "I can't believe there's a Michelin-starred restaurant in such a small, forgotten town. It must be that homeless woman's restaurant." Benjamin agreed that he needed to check Naomi's business after all. He had no idea who she was and didn't want any problems. Henry joked, confident that his boss would pity Naomi again and change his mind about evicting her and selling the property. He decided to accompany his boss to the town to remind Benjamin why they had come here. But the closer Benjamin drove to his restaurant, the more surprised he was. There were more and more cars on the road. It seemed that all the cars were driving in the same direction as him, and when the man reached his destination, he couldn't say a word. "I didn't know that people in such a small town made so much money. There are so many luxury cars here. I wonder why they're all parked in front of my building." Benjamin was surprised. The men parked across the street because there was no space at the restaurant, and they got out of the car. No, it's not possible, said Benjamin. He pointed his finger at his restaurant. There was a sign confirming the Michelin star. How is this even possible? Henry wondered. Henry, have you even checked the revenue this restaurant generates for us? Benjamin asked his assistant. Henry blushed and lowered his head. Irritably, Benjamin pressed his lips together. They approached the entrance, but a stranger immediately ran towards them and said, I'm sorry, but all the tables here are reserved, he said. I made a reservation a month ago, and I'm not giving up my table to you. Actually, I'm the owner of this place, Benjamin said seriously, adjusting his jacket. You don't look like Naomi, the indignant stranger replied. Benjamin ignored the man's further complaints and opened the door. The interior looked exactly like the one in the advertisement photo at the town's entrance. In this cozy and elegant space, it was simply impossible to recognize the place Benjamin had left years ago. Alice immediately ran towards Benjamin. Hello, I remember you, the girl cried joyfully. Can you bring Mom here or take me to her? Benjamin asked politely. Alice nodded happily and took the businessman's hand. Naomi was delighted to see Benjamin. I thought I'd never see you again, said the woman. Naomi looked stunning. She seemed to have aged 10 years and lost weight. How can a person who bakes pastries look so wonderful? Benjamin said with a smile. Naomi blushed and offered the man to sit at a table. She told him how she had managed to improve the restaurant so much. She was surprised to learn that a food critic had visited the restaurant. Apparently, this had helped the restaurant win such an important award. Our restaurant was included in the list of the best restaurants in our town. Then we were featured in an article published in a very important magazine, she said. After reading it, I found out that a very famous traveler had visited us. He has a blog about his travels where he talked about our restaurant. He has several million followers, and that's why people from other towns started coming to us. But why didn't you tell me about it? Benjamin asked, surprised. How could I have missed such information at that moment? Henry coughed softly. I tried calling you and sending you text messages. I even managed to find your professional email, but you ignored all my emails, Naomi said, looking at Henry incredulously. Benjamin also looked at his assistant with suspicion. I just wanted to protect you from unnecessary information, Henry replied, lowering his head. You made a mistake, added Benjamin, and everyone fell silent.